Now, I know some of you that have been checking out my NBA draft videos, and in particular my mock draft videos, might get the sense that I'm not a very big fan of Jahlil Okafor, the center from Duke, and that I'm very down on him and don't think much of him as a prospect. I don't want to totally put that out there because that's not entirely accurate. When I look at Jahlil Okafor, I see somebody that's missing badly in today's game, and that's a legit center. A guy 6'11", 270 pounds. That is a legit center. Not a five that's going to play out of position at the four. Not a five who spends all of his damn time on offense on the perimeter. A legit center. A legit low post scorer with a nice array of moves, even at his young age. A guy who has tremendous offensive upside, who's good with the ball off the dribble down low, who has some nice spin moves, his nice ability to finish around the basket. He's going to be a legit low post scorer at the five position at the NBA level. Those guys don't grow on trees. Those guys aren't available every day. And, you know, he is that type of big time offensive prospect. I truly believe that. A guy who at times has shown me some range, who, if he works at it, can get even better, and he can be a real dominant, frankly, offensive force at the NBA level. However, I have a lot of concerns about Jahlil Okafor and his game and how he translates as a player to the NBA level, and ultimately too many concerns to sit there and justify him being taken with a top 2 or 3 pick in this draft. And for those reasons, I personally don't think the Lakers should draft Jahlil Okafor with the second overall pick. What are some of my big concerns with Okafor? Number one is conditioning. This is a guy that he looked at times like he could keep up, but he was also playing at Duke. He was playing in college. It's a different flow. It's a different tempo. This is a player, frankly, going back to high school, that I've never really looked at and thought he was in incredibly good shape. And my concern is his ability to keep the weight down, to keep himself in good enough shape, to be able to handle the rigors of an 82-game NBA schedule, to be able to handle the style of play from physicality, from a speed and quickness standpoint. I have significant concerns about his condition. That right there in and of itself is a major red flag, but there are more red flags. When you're talking about in a league where, until proven otherwise, the hack of Shaq, the hack of Dwight, hack of DeAndre philosophy is still going to be able to be utilized and incorporated, a guy that shot just barely over 50% from the free throw line could potentially be a major liability in big-time key situations for his team. And while Jahlil Okafor could be an offensive star for you, what good is he going to do you if he can't consistently hit from the free throw line? And if you're going to have to take him out of the game for large stretches of time, especially in the fourth quarter. I look at him from a rebounding and shot blocking standpoint. He's not that particularly good at either, especially for a guy with his size. Yes, he blocked some shots at Duke, but a lot of times those almost looked like flat-footed block shots more than they did like him actually making a play, helping on the weak side, what have you. I mean, he wasn't a very good shot blocker. He's not much of a rim presence for as big as he is, 6'11", 270 with a nice long wingspan. He's not much of a shot blocker. I don't think he's that good of a rebounder. I think he allows himself to get beat out on the blocks a lot. He's not very good at boxing out. He has a tendency to reach. You know, he was able to get away with it at college, but he won't be able to get away with it the same at the NBA level. But most importantly of all, I have concerns about his defense. You know, in today's NBA, if you're going to have a center play big time minutes, that he's got to be some type of rim protector. He's got to be some type of presence down low. And I just don't see where Jahlil Okafor is that type of guy yet, and I don't know if he will ever develop into that type of guy. He could develop maybe into an average defensive player, which would be good enough, perhaps, for as good as he's going to be on the offensive end. But the huge concern I have about him on the defensive end is not just for him in terms of not being a great presence down low. It's more so with, again, as much as the game has become a perimeter and guard-dominated game, and as much of an important part of every team's offense, for the most part, that the pick and roll has become, Most NBA teams could just exploit Jahlil Okafor on that end to kingdom freaking come. Jahlil Okafor could totally implode the infrastructure of his team's defense. I mean, because whoever's going to line up against Jahlil Okafor is going to be utilized as the screen guy in a pick and roll, and Okafor is not going to be able to rotate or he's not going to be able to get over. It's just going to create all types of problems, and he doesn't have the lateral quickness to be able to defend on the perimeter all that well either. You know, when I look at him, I see a guy like a Brook Lopez, a guy like an Al Jefferson, guys that have ability to put the ball in the hoop. But Brook Lopez, not much of a rebounder. Al Jefferson, not much of a defender. And at the end of the day, what have teams featuring either one of these guys of star players ever really accomplished or never really won? Is that the type of guy that you want to take with the second overall pick? You know, you're in a position in what I think is a good draft to find a guy, if you're the Lakers, that could be a real impact difference maker, to be that star after Kobe Bryant exits stage right after the 2015-2016 season. You're going to have to rebuild somewhat for the future. You're going to have to find that new star. You don't have that new star on the roster. And Jordan Clarkson is a nice player, but until proven otherwise, he's not a star. Julius Randle, you know, he missed pretty much all of his rookie season due to injury. Who knows how he'll develop at the NBA level? You need a star. And in particular, you need a star that makes you fit the modern NBA game. When you look at the modern NBA game, I'm talking about those teams that can run pick and roll. It's a very guard and wing perimeter dominated game. The fact that teams are still stuck in this mindset that you've got to have that dominant big man to win are just foolish. You look at recent NBA champions, the Golden State Warriors. Where was their dominant post player? Didn't exist. The San Antonio Spurs, you might bring up Tim Duncan. That's all fine and good. But he wasn't all that great in that series against the Heat in 2014. And furthermore, the reason they won that championship was because Kawhi Leonard got on fire in the second half of that series. And Boris Diaw created all types of problems for the Heat all throughout the series. And even when you look at the Heat with LeBron and Wade and Bosh, their big man was their third best player in Bosh, and he was primarily a perimeter player. The Dallas Mavericks, they had a role player like Tyson Chandler at center. Dirk Nowitzki was their best player, but Dirk Nowitzki, again, a Hall of Famer, but still a perimeter-based player. You'll bring up the Lakers of 2009, 2010 back-to-back champions. You'll talk this shit about Bynum and Gasol, and that's all fine and good. Some of the matchups worked out for them, though, but by far, clearly their best player was still the guard in Kobe Bryant. And even if you go to the 08 Celtics with Pierce, Allen, and Garnett, Garnett was only the third best player. And frankly, on the offensive end, in a lot of ways, he was a perimeter-based player. What recent team has won a championship with their best player, or even, frankly, their second best player, being a dominant low-post scorer? You've got those Lakers teams of 09 and 010, and that is it. That's it. It's just an outdated, antiquated way of thinking. And when you look for a team like the Lakers and who they have to run up against just in the Western Conference, you're looking at a team like the Golden State Warriors with Klay Thompson and Stephen Curry. How is Jahlil Okafor going to make a difference there? The Houston Rockets with James Harden and, yeah, even Dwight Howard, who you can at least incorporate in the pick and roll, and you could roll Howard to the basket. Imagine Jahlil Okafor having to contend with that. It's a fucking nightmare. The Spurs with Kawhi Leonard and Tony Parker and, you know, maybe still a Tim Duncan, or if they bring somebody else in via free agency like a Marc Gasol or a LaMarcus Aldridge, what have you. The Memphis Grizzlies, you could sit there and say, well, they've got Marc Gasol and they've got Zach Randolph, but they've still got Mike Conley running the show out at the point. You know, you got to have people that can match up with these guys. The Blazers with Damian Lillard, the Los Angeles Clippers with Chris Paul, the Oklahoma City Thunder with Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant when he's healthy. It's a guard perimeter-driven league. I cannot emphasize this enough. And if the Lakers want to contend in the modern NBA, they must adapt and they must adjust. Look, I understand the history of the Lakers is that all throughout their history, when they've been at their best, they've had great big men. George Mikan, Wilt the Stilt, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Shaquille O'Neal, Paul Gasol, and Andrew Bynum as a tandem when they were together in 09-010. But let's take a look at this. Yeah, Mikan was one thing. That was an entirely different era. That was a mostly pre-shot clock era. Then you're also talking about Wilt the Stilt, and for the years he had at the Lakers, it was closer to the tail end of his career. They won in exactly one championship, and even with those teams, you still had guards like Jerry West and Gail Goodrich, not to mention a great wing player like an Elgin Baylor, who missed the team, had to retire during their 71-72 championship season. Then you're talking about those Kareem Lakers, but those are ultimately the Magic Lakers. They didn't win shit with Kareem before Magic got there. And then you bring in guys like James Worthy and Byron Scott, and look at the championships they won throughout the 80s. Even other guys that were there, the guys like the Michael Coopers, what have you. You get the point. Shaquille O'Neal. Yeah, you also had Kobe Bryant. Gasol and Bynum, great. But you still had Kobe Bryant. It is a guard and perimeter-dominated league. And there are two types of teams in today's NBA. The teams that understand it, accept it, and adapt their style of play, and adapt their personnel to fit accordingly. Or those teams that get stuck behind, that sit there and fool themselves into this cocoon of old school way of thinking, that think that the big man route is the way to go. It's not. Yes, it's great if you can have that legit center that can give you that legit low post scoring. But Brook Lopez and especially Al Jefferson can provide that. Even DeMarcus Cousins can provide that in Sacramento too. And what are those teams fucking doing with those guys? You've got to have that guard. You've got to have that perimeter player. To me, I think personally, if the Lakers pass on a guy like a D'Angelo Russell or Justice Winslow for a Jahlil Okafor, I think they're making a mistake, and a tragic mistake. This will be a very interesting thing for me to see with the Lakers. Are they going to go based off of their history, off of that old school way of thinking? Or are they going to adapt and modernize? And are they going to sit there and understand that they have to change their way of thinking, and that just because this is the big band and that's what you would always take in the past, it doesn't mean that's what you should take now. Period. The Lakers must understand that they need somebody on the wing, or they need somebody on the perimeter that can play on both ends of the floor. And while D'Angelo Russell's not much of a defender, he could potentially become one. You could sit there and say, well, you've already got Clarkson. Why would you bring in a guy like Russell? Well, a guy like Russell might long-term even be better suited to play the two. And at this point in time, a guy like Russell, you bring him in and you figure out where the fuck to play him later, or Justice Winslow, that type of 3-and-D guy that could become much more, and I think will become much more at the NBA level. Maybe if you want to gamble on a Russell Westbrook type of player and a guy like an Emmanuel Mudiay, what have you, if you really want to get froggy and go find that stretch four like a Kristaps Porzingis. To me, all of those guys make more sense for the Los Angeles Lakers than Jahlil Okafor. They do. I think ultimately the Lakers are going to take Jahlil Okafor. A lot of fans are going to be pleased and excited about this. And I think they're ultimately going to end up being just a little bit disappointed. Okafor is not going to be a bust. Unless he eats himself out of the league, if he just doesn't care about defense at all and doesn't work on it at all, he will be a stat sheet filler on an inconsequential bad team. I think he'll be more than that. And I think he'll be a very good player. And in fact, I do think he could become an all-star. In part, maybe because of the lack of real centers at the NBA level, because he will have that ability to fill the stat sheet on the offensive end. He'll be an all-star in the NBA. I don't dispute that. But I don't think he's the guy that you build a championship team around in today's modern NBA. And if you're the Lakers with all your history and all your prestige and all your championship pedigree, to me, if you're wanting to rebuild, you're wanting to rebuild the right way. And in order to rebuild the right way, you have to build a championship contender. And the way to build a championship contender is through the point guard position and the wings on the perimeter. It's not through dominant big men. It's just an antiquated way of thinking. The Los Angeles Lakers should not select Jahlil Okafor number 2 overall in Thursday's draft, and I'm sticking to my guns on this one.